Paul, I think we should record a new cold open for this episode on Mr. Freeze.
I think this opening is cold enough already.
To the bat bulls. Welcome to the Bat Polls. I wouldn't not be surprised if this wasn't the keenest podcast about Batman 66 since old Mo got the hot squat.
Wild.
I thought I'd start with a super funny joke. Now, you have to be a Batman 66 fan to get these super funny jokes, but anyway.
Yes, so to get anything that we've said past the cold open, and perhaps including the cold open, I think you'd have to be a fan of the show to understand it. Wild.
This is Tim in Tokyo. That's my brother Paul in Hanover, New Hampshire.
How's it going, eh?
Our theme version this time is Batman Boogaloo by Cuban flautist Jose Fajardo and his brass band from 1968. This Batman Boogaloo has a lot more Boogaloo in it than it does Batman.
Yes. Somehow he avoided taking up the part that shows up in so many versions.
Well,
of the
yeah,
theme.
I mean, it's mostly a completely different song. He just kind of starts out with a Batman theme and then goes to the very Cuban-sounding main section, and then at the very end reverts to the Batman theme for a few measures, and then it's over.
Right. I felt like I was watching Anchorman, the Legend of Ron Burgundy, during Will Ferrell's gigantically long jazz flute solo.
But yeah, I was thinking it's interesting how many of our theme versions have come from Latin American countries. Yeah,
it seems to have struck a chord, so to speak, with a lot of Latin American musicians.
Well, and especially this one's from Cuba. Given the Cold War, I'm a little surprised that anybody in Cuba would have even known what Batman was.
Right. I wondered about that, too. It's possible that Batman made it in under the radar as an import or an export to Cuba because it seemed so innocuous, perhaps. But, there's so much discussion of, good citizenship in the American way in the show that that would seem a little surprising as well. Of course, in any, under any repressive regime, throughout history, artists tended to know more about what was going on in the outside world than their, ordinary citizens of an oppressive regime did, because they got to travel, they got to, tour. They were supposed to be kind of ambassadors for their country's culture to the rest of the world. So they might have been this guy might have been exposed to Batman that way.
Yeah. Well, I also found that the Boogaloo itself was developed in New York City. So maybe he had run off to New York by this time anyway. Maybe he escaped Cuba or something. I don't know.
It's possible. This Boogaloo was made in New York City. New York City! And
then came the Saturday morning show, The Boogaloos. Anyway.
And then came that infamous hip-hop film, Electric Boogaloo.
Right. By the way, people might have noticed I've got a new mic. You can't see it because this is a podcast, but it's on an arm that's clamped onto the edge of my desk. So freeing up some desk space in the process.
Excellent.
So hopefully this sounds pretty good. I've been experimenting with it today. I mean, I have to be careful not to turn the gain up too loud, and then you get a lot of, wind noises. in it, but I think this is going to work out okay. But if you hear any wind noises, you don't need to close the window. It's my mic.
No, but frankly, it's appropriate to an episode about Mr. Freeze to have a cold wind blowing through your new microphone.
They've got to be the answer. We've tried everything. The metal analyzer, the spectroscope, both negative. No hidden compartments. I just don't understand it.
Look at the back of this cat, Robin. What do you see?
Well, just some funny markings. Why?
Look at the other one.
Well, some different markings.
These cats are supposed to be identical.
Bat Research Lab. Now, this is something that kind of fell in my lap this past week. And I've already shared this on the All-Seeing, All-Knowing 66 Batman message board.
I almost couldn't get close enough to my microphone in time.
Also shared on the Batman 66 Facebook page that I'm an administrator of, and on the Deconstructing Comics Facebook group. So the Twitter account, Dr. Pop Culture BG, which is Chuck Coletta at Bowling Green State University in Ohio, which of course was the home of the 2019 Batman Conference, shared with me and others, including John S. Drew, a tweet from Plaid Stallions, which is a website of 1970s and 1980s toy and catalog collecting. This tweet was drawing attention to a YouTube video of a 1989 Nick at Night pilot for a show called Cartoon Lost and Found, hosted by Adam West. Perhaps you've heard of him.
It happens 2 or 3 times a week. The bell rings, I open the door, and all that's there is a sack of unwanted, abandoned cartoons. At this point, I'd be happy just to see a Jehovah's Witness. All the networks do it. An old cartoon can't hold up the toy-telling arrogance of modern animation. Pretty soon, it's a burlap ticket to Never Never Land. And that's where I come in. I run the cartoon Lost and Found, one of TV Land's juiciest desk jobs. A far cry from my old days as the professor on Gilligan's Island.
And Plaid Stallion said that this pilot was feared lost for a long time, and then it suddenly just appeared on YouTube. Well, apparently it went up last December, and people gradually discovered it, I guess.
Yeah, somebody must have videotaped it and come across their ancient VHS tape somewhere along the line, or in this case, a Betamax, right?
Right. Well, yeah, so I've got the kind of scoop here, but if you're not familiar with it, and I'll put it in the show notes too. This show is made up of Adam talking about cartoons, interacting with a couple of characters who pop by, and he's making a lot of winking comments related to what he himself is most known for. Jokes that you wouldn't get if you didn't know that he'd played Batman. Interspersed with clips from old cartoons, mainly from the 60s. But it's a weird show. I mean, these clips popping up just feel kind of random. They might be really, really short clips from various cartoons, and it's not even always clear what the name of the cartoon was. And he doesn't say, like, now, here is a clip from George of the Jungle. It's not like that. It's just kind of suddenly, here's this cartoon, that cartoon, this cartoon, 5 seconds of this and 10 seconds of that. And then we're back with him, and he's talking about some stuff. But it's not, I had expected it would feel a little more curated, like, now we're going to watch this cartoon and some history of it. But it felt like every episode would, if they made a bunch of these, they'd all be kind of the same.
Right. Yeah, I didn't watch it. I'm sorry to say. I'd be able to have a better discussion of it with you if I had, obviously. But it sounds as though with no format, the show really relied on Adam West's personality primarily, which means that the cartoons didn't really matter very much. And if there's no regularity of what to expect, okay, here's something like, viewer mail or stupid pet tricks on David Letterman would probably have served this show better. A certain kind of cartoon or a certain kind of scene that they could do every week would be a decent format. But instead, they relied on Adam West's personality and notoriety to drive it forward.
Yeah. So the video is on the YouTube channel Beta Gems Lost Media. The concept of the channel is converting bits of an archive of Betamax tapes running from 1983 into the 90s. It started out as just from the collection of the channel's proprietor. I actually reached out to him. You can see our discussion in the comments on the YouTube video.
Ooh.
So he said originally he and his wife, they got a Super Beta machine new in the early 80s and gradually accumulated an archive that was mainly intended to be live music performances. And he says, since I started the Beta Gems channel, though, I also get a lot of beta tapes sent to me that people request to have digitized to DVD, which I do in return for permission to upload anything that seems well suited for Beta Gems. So I asked, now what about this Adam West pilot? Was this from your collection? He says, yes, that was ours. We had no idea how rare and sought after it was, or we would have uploaded it sooner. So, sitting on a treasure that he didn't know was treasure, I guess.
Wild.
So, yeah, it's kind of an interesting curiosity.
Cool. Yes, and it's great to have another few, at least a few more minutes of footage of Adam West doing his Adam West thing, even if it is a little embarrassing at times.
Okay, so our main topic this time is Mr. Freeze. So, the obvious tack here is 3 different actors played Mr. Freeze. Which one was best? But I thought first we would kind of go back to the whole origin of the character, which, as we noted when we first talked about the George Sanders episode, at that time there had only been one comic, and the character was called Mr. Zero at that time. In February 1959, Batman 121. And in that one, spoiler alert, Mr. Zero is cured of needing to be in freezing temperatures at the end. So, it's clearly just meant to be a one-off at the time.
Right. This character was apparently co-created by Dave Wood and Sheldon Moldoff as Mr. Zero. And he looks, as drawn by Moldoff, he looks like Otto Preminger. I mean, he's a completely bald man. Although he dresses a little bit more like George Sanders in the first arc, with his kind of casual suits, as well as the kind of spacesuit-like thing he wears the refrigerated suit he wears when he's going out into the world to commit crimes. I wanted to mention, though, that there is a precedent among DC villains for Mr. Zero, and that's Captain Cold from The Flash, who first appeared in Showcase number 8 in 1957. Captain Cold didn't have cold powers, and he didn't have any need for refrigeration, but he did have a cold ray. And guess how Flash defeated him?
I don't know.
Guess how Flash defeated everybody in the early Silver Age? He ran around him really fast. And somehow, I don't know, blew up his freeze gun, or all I was able to find in the various wiki sites regarding DC, Silver Age DC stuff was that he defeated Captain Cold by circling around him.
Okay.
Again, that's pretty much how Flash did everything back in those days. Anyway, so that's another cold villain who may have influenced the creation of Mr. Zero.
Now, in Joel Eisner's Bat book, page 54, there's a mysterious sentence. I'm trying to figure out exactly. There's information missing from this sentence. This episode was originally scripted by Leonard Stad. He means Stod. It's a typo. Stodd, it should be. But the script was rejected and handed over to Max Hodge, who created the Mr. Freeze character from scratch using the Mr. Zero character, who appeared only once in a February 1959 Batman comic book, as a starting point. Now, basing one character on another character is the opposite of starting from scratch. But more importantly, what on earth was Stodd's script about if it wasn't about Mr. Freeze? I mean, that doesn't make... I mean, he's saying it was originally scripted by Mr. Leonard Stad, but then Max Hodge did something completely different with it. So I'm really confused by that sentence.
Yeah, I can't make heads or tails of it either.
The Laramie Archive has the only Leonard Stad script that they have is The Secret of the Impossible Crimes, which we covered back in episode 110. There's no other Leonard Stad stuff there that I could find. So I don't know what we know about this Leonard Stad Freeze script, if it even existed.
Maybe Joker had a freeze gun in the original. He did seem to have,
maybe it was Two-Face with a freeze gun.
Possibly. So did Max Hodge write other scripts besides the second Mr. Freeze arc?
I think he just wrote the first two Freezes and nothing else for Batman.
Okay. So apparently there was very little left of Stodd's original script because Stodd doesn't receive any credit.
Yeah.
Not even a story by next to the teleplay by.
Now, in Batman in Celebration of the Classic TV series, also known as the Bat Coffee Table book by Garcia and Desris, it's mentioned that when Dozier and Semple met in Spain in 1965 to talk about projects Semple was working on for Dozier, that one of the things they talked about was Batman, but there was also a science fiction pilot called Mr. Zero.
That is fascinating.
Now, I've actually asked Laramie for a scan of that. Didn't get it back yet, but will report in the future. Now, when this was mentioned on the message board, Jim Aiken was wondering if Dozier and Semple decided to call the Batman villain Mr. Freeze to avoid confusion. But the problem with that theory is that Semple never wrote any Mr. Freeze.
Right.
So I don't know if that's a reason or not. Or maybe they just decided, maybe Hodge was told, yeah, we've already got a Mr. Zero in the works, so call this guy something else. I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's an astute observation on Jim's part, I think, or speculation. It makes a lot of sense that Semple and Dozier may have been talking about the kind of, the run of villains, who they might have brainstormed, whom they could possibly take from the comics that Dozier had read. And needed to make sure that the name of the new character, or the name of the Mr. Zero character, didn't step on the toes of another property that Dozier was working on. So that actually makes a lot of sense. We'll probably never know for sure, but it's a really astute possibility. Sorry, possibilities can't be astute. Observations and conjectures can be astute.
Okay. So, yeah, it's clear. Well, and we did some investigation on this a long time ago, or someone shared something with us. I'm a little hazy on it now. But in the first Sanders episode, Batman addresses him as Dr. Schimmel.
Yes.
Tell Batman when he arrives, if he arrives, what happened.
Tell him yourself, Dr. Schimmel.
But apparently, through mishearing of that, in the comics, he became Dr. Art Shivel.
I remember this.
I don't know if it was a mishearing or if they changed it on purpose. I don't know the answer on that one.
So when Paul Dini changed his name to Victor Fries,
Yeah.
for the Batman, the animated series, that really famous story that introduced the origin story of Mr. Freeze that then became canon in the comics. That just fit so much more nicely than Schimmel.
So, the show established some things about Mr. Freeze, at least for a while, before Paul Dini. I mean, I'm not familiar with what's happened with Freeze more recently, but I don't know if this carried over into the comics or not. But I was realizing Mr. Zero in 1959 was not German, but all 3 iterations on the show did appear to be German or have some kind of European accent.
Right. Although, well, this is just an observation. I have to admit something. In order to not shortchange the Eli Wallach Mr. Freeze and compare him unfavorably to George Sanders and Otto Preminger, as I did when first watching the series with you when we were, recording our episodes. I decided to watch Wallach first and then go backwards. Watch the Wallach arc first, then the Preminger arc, and then the George Sanders arc. And I realized listening to it that the version of the Mr. Freeze accent that Wallach does is actually much more Polish sounding than the German accents of either, the put-on one of George Sanders and the legitimate one of Otto Preminger. Because it turns out that Wallach was actually a Polish-American Jew who grew up in an Italian neighborhood in Brooklyn. Like he was, his father ran a candy store, and they were like basically the only Jews that they knew in the neighborhood. But he was born in the U.S., but Wallach's family came from Poland, and so perhaps for that reason, the kind of default accent that Wallach goes into makes the V's into W's, kind of the way that Mr. Chekhov does on Star Trek. It's a really big Wessel, Captain.
Yeah.
Aren't you being a little rough on poor Professor Isaacson?
Poor Professor Isaacson will become rich Professor Isaacson, Glacier. If we can put his secret formula to use for our own gains, we'll all be rich. The world will be yours, Glacier.
Mine.
Of course. Don't you see the potential? The Kremlin will be a cold water flat in a second. The White House an icebox. We would control everything from cold cream to cold wars.
Well, I actually went back and listened to our 3 Freeze episodes.
Wow, you really did a deep dive, dude. You actually listened to our show?
Yeah, I know.
Oh my God, you're breaking our sacred trust.
And
we took a blood oath never to listen to our own show.
And you know what was the toughest thing for me listening to those old shows is the editing.
Oh, yeah. I
don't know that I've ever mentioned this, but way back when I first started podcasting, which was the end of 2005, so in maybe 2006 or 7, Mulele, who was a big presence on Deconstructing Comics at the time, said, "Oh, you don't need to cut out all the space or whatever. Just let it be." Let it sound like it was when it was live, and people will get the feeling of. But it took me a long time to realize that listening to it later, you don't want to be that natural. And I mean, just in the past year or two, I've been much more religious about taking ums out and stuff like that.
Removing dead space and such.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, even as recently as 4 years ago, the Wallach episode, I was like, oh, gee, I want to go back and re-edit this. Anyway, but yeah, and I learned some things, or was reminded of some things that I'd completely forgotten. Some of which have nothing to do with Mr. Freeze, but so in the Sanders episode, you wondered if the reason that he was playing German was that maybe he was supposed to be like an escaped Nazi. I mean, it makes sense for the time. It was 20 years after the war. There would have still been perhaps living war criminals that were, hiding out in Brazil or someplace.
Right, and he has the kind of mad scientist quality. Someone who created a freeze ray that went wrong. like, the Nazis were trying to come up with super weapons throughout the war.
Welcome to the Superman Fan Podcast. My name is Billy Hogan, and I will be your host. Before we begin our journey through the time barrier, please ensure that your red indestructible capes are securely fastened around your necks so that we may all travel safely into the past to explore the Silver Age adventures of the Man of Steel in the pages of Action Comics, Superman, Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane, and World's Finest Comics. After we return from our journey, I encourage you to go to the website, thesupermanfanpodcast.blogspot.com. I look forward to have you join me each week to explore the Silver Age adventures of the Man of Steel.
He's the grand old man of Marvel. Stan Lee was involved in the creation of some of the world's favorite comics characters, like Spider-Man, Iron Man, Thor, and the Hulk. But he didn't create them on his own. Artists like Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko were also instrumental in the creation of these characters, but many fans of the Marvel movies don't even know their names. Did Stan take too much credit by design? Or was he just given the credit because he's more media-friendly? Millions of words have been written about Lee, both to praise him and disparage him. What are the books about Lee that you should read? On Deconstructing Comics, we're going to screen the books about Lee so you don't have to. Join us, true believer, as we read as many books about Stan Lee as we can stand, and compare them to each other. Find Deconstructing Comics in your favorite podcast app. Excelsior! I was thinking, so it's interesting, on Batman, including the movie, there were 3 Catwomans and 3 Freezes. But the 3 versions of Catwoman were more similar to each other than the 3 versions of Freeze.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder what that was all about. I mean, certainly, I think, obviously, Preminger and Wallach are wearing basically the same costume.
Mm-hmm.
Completely different from Sanders. And of course, part of it was Sanders in that helmet. He had to dub in all his lines later.
Mm-hmm.
And I was noticing at the beginning of the Preminger story, Gordon and O'Hara are talking about the collar that keeps his head cold.
The leader was wearing what? A collar with jet nozzles? To keep his head cold? Of course, at once.
Jet nozzles to keep your head cold. Sounds like a good invention.
But there's just one man who might have invented it, Chief O'Hara. Just one man who can live in an environment 50 degrees below zero. And just one man who is likely to have kidnapped Miss Iceland.
Shiver me timbers, Commissioner. You don't mean Mr. Freeze.
I do indeed, that cold-blooded, cold-hearted, calloused culprit.
Or that comes up as a topic, and they seem to be kind of trying to explain the costume change there to the audience.
Right, which is it's a a decent use of expository, and it seems it's relatively well disguised, I guess, as it's brought up as some a kind of a quirk that they're trying to explain to themselves, and then they realize that it must be Mr. Freeze. So when they alight on that first, it informs the audience right away, of what the difference is.
I guess another difference between Preminger and Wallach is that Wallach had hair.
Yes.
And he apparently didn't want to get it all shaved off so he would look more like Preminger. So,
or wear a bald head wig, a skinhead wig like the one that Vincent Price wears to play Egghead.
Yeah, I suppose that's what they would have done. But yeah, it's just interesting to me that they didn't try to keep them consistent.
Yeah, and it may, one of the issues here may be that all 3 of these actors are character actors. Preminger didn't show up in that many movies himself. He didn't, appear in front of the camera all that much, but he tended to play character type roles, like his role as, basically the Colonel Klink character in Stalag 17, the Billy Wilder film. So, he did appear in front of the camera from time to time, but he was definitely in the realm of character actors, very much as George Sanders was a character actor throughout his career. He was never a big star and never, got top billing, but he, someone like Thelma Ritter, who got more for making Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window than any other actor on the film besides Jimmy Stewart. In fact, she made more than Grace Kelly did. Character actors were in high demand, got paid really, really well, and often got paid more than people whose names appeared above theirs on the titles of a film. So Sanders had a storied career as a character actor, and so did Wallach. Wallach was a really well-respected method actor on the stage. And he once said that, he would go and make spaghetti westerns because, he spent 10 weeks on a horse in Spain, and he could, have a cushion to come back and do plays. So his reason for acting in films and television was primarily to supplement, or not supplement, but to enable his theater habit, if you will. So each of these actors are expected to sort of create a character distinct, to them as a character actor. And maybe that's one reason why the characters are so different. And we should, I suppose, talk about what makes them different in general. I would say that one thing that makes them all similar is they're all sadists. This Mr. Freeze is a sadistic character, I think. He seems to enjoy giving pain, particularly the Otto Preminger version, who is just an ass. And I wonder why he believes that lowering the Miss Iceland's temperature to below 50 degrees below zero is going to make her love him. How about make her dead?
Yeah, well, and I don't understand why he doesn't just dump instant freeze on her, because that's how he became that way. So
sure,
why doesn't he seem to realize that's what he would need to accomplish his goal with Miss Iceland?
Because the screenwriter's whispering in his ear that he needs to create a deadline. He can't do it right away. He's got to stretch it out so Batman and Robin have time to get there and get, trapped and put in the frosty freezies, etc., etc.
Now we'll feel hate for once. Hate. Like I feel hate.
You should feel hate. I certainly hate you.
But why, my darling Miss Iceland? Haven't I made you comfortable, all this beautiful furniture, those nice, cool, frosty bars, to lower the temperature in your beautiful body, to air condition you, darling, so you would stop hating me? Once you hit 50 degrees below zero, you will be loving me.
Loving you?
Now, another inconsistency is only one of them says wild all the time. I would love to know what that was all about.
Me too. Was it Preminger? I mean, was Preminger a swinger or something? Did he put his car keys into a giant bowl with, at jacuzzi parties and go home with whoever grabbed his keys? It seems very kind of very, very 60s to me. Very kind of, old guy pretending to be younger guy, hipster type of thing.
Now, we haven't yet looked at any Mr. Freeze scripts, and I think we're going to have to do that, whether the patrons want it or not, because I really want to know if that second Hodge script starts out with Mr. Freeze saying wild all the time.
Yes, I'd love to know that, too.
If Preminger wanted to add that.
I don't suppose there are stage directions in that script either of, like twiddles his eyebrow. Because Preminger does that every 15 seconds in this arc.
In our episode, we mentioned that the Bat Book said that was Preminger's idea, if I remember correctly. I didn't.
The giant eyebrows or twiddling the giant eyebrows?
Well, maybe twiddling he definitely, the eyebrows themselves, and perhaps his brushing of the one either. Although I think you speculated in that episode that maybe he was trying to keep it from falling off.
Yes. Gosh, my past self was so smart.
I think this was just probably sloppiness because it was Charles Hoffman. But in the Wallach version, there's never a mention of him needing to be in 50 below temperatures.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not clear why he's wearing that suit. It's just never mentioned.
Yeah, my speculation about that was that he'd already shown up on, or Mr. Freeze's character anyway, if not Eli Wallach, had already shown up once that season. And there wasn't any need to, return to that particular fact. Might have also been an attempt to keep from repeating the same defeating Freeze shtick that took place in the first 2 episodes. It had to do with him, being outside his comfort zone.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of repeating, in both Preminger and Wallach, Mr. Freeze is threatening to freeze over Gotham City / the whole United States unless he's paid a lot of money.
$1 billion. The citizens of Gotham City will pay me, or I will bury all of them under one huge cake of ice.
His speech on the teleprompter had become frozen, and in its place was a message from Mr. Freeze.
Bless me suspender buttons.
Saying that this city, this state, this country would be returned to the Ice Age in a matter of moments unless we capitulated to all his demands at once.
Well, what are his demands?
$50 million is not to be sneezed at. Though, of course, I never catch cold.
How about coming up with a new idea, Hoffman?
Well, I suppose the stakes are higher in Mr. Freeze's instance than, just cornering the Gotham City perfume market, let's say.
Or the Gotham City refrigerator market. Anyway, it's not season 3 yet.
No, although it feels a little like it might be, especially the Wallach arc.
On the message board, there's a thread called Third Season Queries and What Ifs. And in that discussion, it's pointed out that perhaps the reason that there was no Mr. Freeze in season 3 was that Mr. Freeze was kind of an expensive villain to do.
Ooh.
Certainly, if you look at the Sanders arc, there's all kinds of special effects in it. Glowing people and the freeze ray and the hot path, nice warm 76 degrees temperature.
I knew you were going to bring that up.
And the steam representing the cold areas. So that took a lot of work and money to make it look like that. In Preminger, well, there's one glowing cop. There are some freeze rays. There's dumping snow all over Gordon's office and then having to clean it up. So there is some cost there, too. Now, I noticed in the Wallach version, it's the end of season 2. Money's getting tighter and tighter. The freeze ray basically just shoots, like, steam. Except the only animation effect I saw was when he, unconvincingly shoots that weapon off screen, and then everybody's library and the Bat computer and everything is frozen. And it's just, that weapon is in the middle of the screen, so there's just a little bit of cartoon ray off to the right side. And that's the only animation I found in the whole arc.
Yeah, somebody just did magic marker on the negative or something over in that one edge.
So they were finding a way to do Mr. Freeze cheaper, but I don't know, maybe it was still a little more expensive than doing other villains, or maybe they couldn't figure out who to play Mr. Freeze, or there were no scripts. Hard to tell what the reason was.
Yeah, but that third episode does look cheap. Let's see, where does the seal turn up? Is that in the Preminger or
no,
in the Wallach? That's the Wallach. So I think they might have put the money into the seal on the third in the third arc. But did you notice in the third arc that there's that chest or that freezer where Batman and Robin are supposed to be trapped, and it turns out they're wearing their thermal skivvies. Excuse me, their bat thermal skivvies. Every time that door opens and closes, you can see the scrim wobble. The door is just made of it's like wooden frame with canvas tacked to it. And so it's supposed to look like a big, heavy, freezer door, but it flops when they open and close it. So, yeah, and even the ice looks a little tired, like, those huge blocks of ice that are sitting around in the hideout look, exactly like painted pieces of cardboard, which is, obviously what they are.
Well, and then there's that whole fun with stock footage passage of part 2 where it's just Batcopter footage from the movie opposed with the icebergs that are supposedly in Gotham Harbor. So don't need to shoot anything.
That's right. It's like the old Grant Ray Lawrence Marvel Comics cartoons where they just shake the comic book panel in front of the camera to suggest movement.
So, yeah, that expense was a factor with Freeze.
Right.
Okay, so I was thinking about, as I rewatched these, which was my favorite Freeze actor and which was my favorite Freeze episode. So I was expecting to say, before I rewatched them, I was expecting to say that my favorite Freeze actor was going to be George Sanders. Because I was remembering, the Bond villain aspect of that version. But I don't know. Watching it this time, I felt kind of underwhelmed by him. Which actually, now, you knowing much more of his film work than I do, in our original episode, which was episode 8, you were talking about how he didn't seem to be as sharp as in a lot of his other film appearances. And I still have not watched any of those, but just I was kind of wanting a little something more from him.
Yeah, his witticisms, his sense of humor, his wryness that comes from films like All About Eve and Rebecca, and Hangover Square and a few others. I really miss that here even more this time, I think. He seems a little childlike. The zoom stuff, I don't really get why that was a shtick that he does.
Nippy, have you ordered the airplane to go zoom, zoom, zoom?
I do like it when he becomes really intense, like, near the end of the second episode, when he seems to be basically killing Batman by, Batman tries to attack him and, jumps out of the hot zone. And that is in, the 50 below zero temperature, 50 degrees below zero temperature.
Nice, uncomfortable.
Yes, nice, uncomfortable 50 degrees below zero temperature. Let's, state the entire phrase here.
Ultimately, of course, you will die. But how, when, where, mercilessly fast or agonizingly slow, depends.
Depends on what?
On you.
Me?
And me. On how you act and how I feel when the time comes.
And you get a strong impression from Sanders that Mr. Freeze really wants Batman dead for revenge's sake, because it's supposedly Batman's fault that his freeze gun, malfunctioned. Right? Isn't that the background here?
I think what's stated is that Batman accidentally caused the instant freeze to dump on to Miss Dr. Schimmel.
Of course he wants revenge.
I'm not so sure I blame him.
It was an accident, Batman. You didn't mean to knock that beaker of instant freeze on him during the fight in his laboratory.
Right. So, when, Sanders is saying things like, die, Batman, I really believe it. But I also feel as though Sanders is holding something back from his usual wryness that I really miss.
So I had to conclude that my favorite Freeze, believe it or not, is Preminger.
Wyatt!
Oh, do tell, Tim.
I mean, wild or not. I just felt like his kind of screen presence was the best of the three. And my favorite Freeze episode is also Green Ice.
Okay.
Now, all three of them have their problems. You could probably say that about any Batman episode. There are things that you'd like to be better.
Sure.
But, whatever strong points they might also have. But I was thinking, so with Instant Freeze, the highlight of Instant Freeze for me is the special effects, particularly the hot path. It just looks really
I love that.
Interesting. The highlight of Ice Spy is Batman and Bruce Wayne's phone conversation.
Batman? Yes, Mr. Wayne. Have you heard Mr. Freeze's scurrilous demands? Just briefly. If Robin and I act as go-betweens, are you prepared to make the telecast at midnight and pay the ransom, Mr. Wayne? I have no choice, Batman.
I was laughing again watching it today. And, that has nothing to do with Mr. Freeze at all. But the highlight of Green Ice is that long garden party scene.
Right.
There's actually some menace to it. And, it's a scenario that we never saw in any other episode.
Where the fake Batman and Robin are being used to denigrate the real Batman and Robin's reputation.
Well, and the environment, around that little pool on the patio. I don't think we ever saw that area in any other episode.
Right. And it's got a great narrative hook to it. There's a good reason for that pool. It's a sculpture pool on the grounds of Stately Wayne Manor, which makes total sense. But it also, gives Mr. Freeze a chance to incarcerate everyone there by making them stand in the pool and then freezing it over.
Yeah, I mean, when we watched that the first time, I remember actually feeling a little shocked by that scene.
Really?
It just seems a little more intense than most Batman 66 crime scene scenes. Also, by the way, there's special effects there when the water appears to be frozen. There's some more money. Anyway, I really like that scene, and it's the only highlight of a Freeze episode for me that's actually a plot point.
Got it.
Not a special effect, not a comedy bit with Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson. But
right, it has something to do with Mr. Freeze himself.
Yes.
What in the world is this?
Let's get him quick.
Patience, Dick Grayson.
You've all heard me, so no monkey business.
Who is he? How dare he come here and spoil our nice party?
And Preminger's Mr. Freeze is such a jackass. I mean, he's so condescending. Between him and Marie Windsor, who plays Nellie Majors, the reporter, who is after Batman. She's basically doing she's running propaganda screen for Mr. Freeze by suggesting that Batman might be somehow in cahoots with Mr. Freeze, that he's not doing enough to defeat Mr. Freeze, etc., etc. That he might even be taking money on the sly from him when the so-called Green Ice shows up at Commissioner Gordon's office. But between Nellie Majors and Preminger's Mr. Freeze, we really feel like Batman and Robin are kind of stuck. That they're really vulnerable to having their reputations twisted by these the supervillain and his Maul, who is a reporter who believes that she's reporting the truth, but is just basically reporting what Mr. Freeze wants everyone to think.
Robin's indiscreet statement is strictly off the record.
Not off my record, Batman.
I'm sorry, Miss Majors. I certainly wasn't suggesting what your papers should or should not print. It's just that I feel...
That you're on a spot, Batman? Is that it? Oh, I know you're a well-known crime fighter and a local hero. But I've seen many heroes tarnished in the course of my career.
So I also had to give Green Ice points for a super funny inside joke that I utterly missed the first time we talked about that episode. Okay. And in fact, in episode 39 of our podcast, I misinterpreted what was going on there. So
do tell.
Hubie Kearns and Victor Paul, the stuntmen for Batman and Robin, respectively, are cast as henchmen for the entire arc.
Yes, I caught that this time too.
Just so they can dress up as fake Batman and Robin for the garden party scene. And they aren't even credited, even though Hubie seems to have more lines than the henchmen who are credited.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the inside joke is when Freeze sees them come in dressed as Batman and Robin, he says,
"From a distance, even I couldn't tell the difference."
Which is exactly why stuntmen work, because you see them from a distance, and so you can't tell the difference.
Oh, that's beautiful, Tim. Nice catch. Oh, man, that's great.
And it's such an inside joke. The audience probably is not going to get it.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're watching it on crummy black and white 1960s TVs, and they've never picked out Hubie and Victor, probably.
Well, yeah, and because they're either so far from the camera you can't recognize their faces, or their backs are to the camera. Who would know?
Mm-hmm.
Who would match those faces up? The lower halves of those faces with the people they see fighting supervillains during the thick of the fight scenes.
Now, I know with us watching Batman on a crummy black and white TV in the 70s, I never picked out that Robin was not Burt Ward in any scene.
No, me neither. Never would have even considered it. Stunt people completely over my head at that point.
And nobody had any way of knowing their names back then. They were never in the credits. There was no internet. There was no 66 message board.
Right, unless it were done in skywriting, like the skywriting from the Preminger arc.
But then I was thinking, too, since they're playing henchmen, in the fight scenes, they themselves need stand-ins for themselves as henchmen because they're busy being Adam and Bert's stand-ins.
Right. So there have to be stand-ins for the stand-ins. Stuntmen playing the stuntmen. Oh, that's rich. That's really rich. Wow. I love it. Say, the cream of the jest, if you will, to borrow a phrase from a different supervillain, is that Mr. Freeze, as played by Preminger, is a director, right? Otto Preminger is a film director, and so he's staging this whole, fake fight in which Batman and Robin, who are not Batman and Robin, are getting defeated by Mr. Freeze's own henchmen. He's pretty much, directing in front of the camera this time around, as well as, directing from behind the camera in Anatomy of a Murder.
Yeah, that's true. That's kind of an additional inside joke.
Yeah, not possible without the one that you found, though. That's really great.
But meanwhile, in the Sanders arc, I still don't understand what the deal with all the extra Batmans and Mr. Freezes was. That's another reason I want to look at Freeze script, because I'm wondering if there's an answer to that mystery in like an early version of the script that makes more sense.
Yeah, I don't get it either. It made me wonder if perhaps Mr. Freeze, somehow in a, script that wound up, at the bottom of somebody's birdcage, an earlier draft, that Mr. Freeze was also capable of producing energy-based multiples of individual people. Why are there doubles of Batman and Robin and, triples and quadruples in the Sanders arc in both of the first two Mr. Freeze arcs? What's the reasoning? What's the connection, or was it just a complete accident but I still don't understand what the plot purpose of either of them is. Since in the second episode of the Green Ice arc, the Preminger arc, the recap doesn't mention the doubles at all.
Mm-hmm.
They're so unimportant already by the end of the first episode that there's no, the whole business of that helping to destroy, that having these, inept looking doubles of Batman and Robin fighting the villains was supposed to make Batman and Robin look bad. That point has been dropped completely from the recap.
Huh.
So why?
Well, it's effective in part one anyway, but...
Just because it's viled? I don't know.
So what are your favorites?
Oh, boy. Well, like I said, I decided I was going to watch the three arcs in reverse. My hope was that I'd be forced to compare George Sanders and Otto Preminger to Wallach and not the other way around, because I'd never been a fan of the Wallach arc. But this time around, watching Wallach first, well, it also gave me the idea for a Bat Deja Vu, which is a Bat Deja Vu about Eli Wallach. Except what's different about Wallach, of course, is that unlike most of the familiar faces that the Holy Deja Vu segment is supposed to sort of bring out into the limelight a little bit, Wallach was a bona fide character actor who had a hugely successful career on the stage. So he was not one of those walk-ons that you see everywhere in 1960s and 70s television. Wallach had a major coup of a role on film in Baby Doll, 1956, which was an Elia Kazan film that was quite a success to Scandal. That was his first appearance. He often played Italians, since, despite the fact that he was a Polish Jew living in Brooklyn, he grew up in an Italian neighborhood. But he also played Guido in The Misfits, so he was the rival for Marilyn Monroe's affections against Clark Gable in that film. He played Don Altobello in Godfather 3, the Mafia Don, another Italian, who dies from eating poisoned dessert in that film. And, of course, in addition to his first big Western role as Calvera in Magnificent Seven from 1960, he plays Tuco the Ugly in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And so my interest in Wallach ended up kind of multiplying because I watched other Wallach stuff while getting ready for this episode. And I watched The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, or The Good, the Ugly, and the Bad, as it was called in Italian. And Tuco, which means ugly or stumpy, basically, in Spanish, depending on the dialect. Night and day. I mean, you would almost never recognize him playing a Mexican bandit, a Catholic bandit whose brother is a priest in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and playing Mr. Freeze in this episode. Like a lot of actors who showed up on the Batman show, Wallach said that he received more fan mail from playing Mr. Freeze than he received from any of his other roles combined over the years, even Tuco, which is such a famous character from the Leone film that Steve Bissett's cat is named after him. Not Eli, but Tuco. So that's my Bat Deja Vu for this week. But I guess what I would say is that while I think I enjoyed the plot of the Preminger arc the most this time around, I really dug Wallach as Mr. Freeze this time. And again, this may have everything to do with just reversing the order of watching the episodes. So if I was going to make negative comparisons to a standard, it would be basically comparisons to the standard of Wallach. But Wallach is just really good. I mean, he's got great timing. He really makes the character into a character that's distinct from both of the others. He's got this great kind of wild-eyed look that he uses to good effect in the Leone Western. And I just really appreciated his kind of business-likeness about the part. I even liked his hair. But again, he's practically unrecognizable, and that's what a good character actor does in film and television, is kind of just totally disappear into the role. Whereas with Preminger and Sanders, I guess I always thought of them as Preminger and Sanders, doing something, putting on a kind of, campy cape and flopping it around for a couple of episodes. Whereas, Wallach really dug into playing Mr. Freeze, and I just think that, the whole shtick where he's concentrating on, trying to destroy the Ice Capades, basically, or infiltrate the world through the Ice Capades show that his mall is involved in. I mean, maybe all I'm saying is that I appreciate it more than I used to, whereas, I still enjoy the second arc, the Preminger arc, the most as a Batman episode or a Batman arc.
Okay. All right. Well, listeners, we'd like to hear which is your favorite Freeze actor and Freeze story also. So we only got 3 choices in both cases, but...
It is strange, though. Mr. Freeze is a very odd case in that, Catwoman, 3 different actors played him, but 2 in the same season. It makes Mr. Freeze even more of an outlier among the oddball, castings of the show, including, Ann Baxter playing two separate villains over the course of her Batman career.
Hello, I'm Ken Holtzhauser, and if you're looking for something new in comic books, may I recommend my newest comic, The Quick and the Dad, a love letter to the DC, Marvel, Archie, and Harvey comics of my youth. This comic has everything. It has spaceships, dad jokes, alien invasions, time travel, supervillains, and so many bad puns. Hopefully you'll like it. It's the cutest comic you've never heard of, and it's available today in print and digital from indieplanet.com. That's The Quick and the Dad. Join that other dynamic duo, won't you?
Coming up, a TV ad for some Bat merch and the Bat Inbox. Help support To the Bat Polls and all the Deconstructing Comics shows with a monthly donation to the Deconstructing Comics Patreon page at patreon.com/deconcomics for as little as $2 a month. You can get outtakes from every To the Bat Polls episode. Paul and I make bi-weekly videos for patrons, usually featuring a TV trivia quiz. I've made the first one available on the Deconstructing Comics YouTube channel as a sample. Patrons can also vote in polls for which Bat topic you'd like us to cover next. Further perks at higher support levels, including the right to have an ad for your own project on the show once a month, and hours of podcasts on the early issues of The Amazing Spider-Man and the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So go to patreon.com/deconcomics and select the level of your monthly donation. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your support.
Here comes Batman and the boy wonder Robin. The dynamic duo leap into the Batmobile in hot pursuit of the Joker with his tricks and the Penguin with his magic umbrella. They are all here in Color Form's Batman cartoon kit. Let's have an exciting Batman adventure. Put the Penguin in Gotham City. Don't forget his umbrella. Now, Batman makes the scene. Pow! Bam! Color Form's plastic pieces stick like magic. Uh-oh, Robin's in trouble. Can Batman rescue Robin? Will the dynamic duo be boxed in? You'll have hundreds of exciting adventures with the Great Batman Cartoon Kit. By Color Forms. What a toy!
Bat Inbox, about episode 162, our discussion of Lego Batman. So, Paul, take the first one.
Okay, this one is from Batwinged Hornet. Hello, BH. Another winner, guys, he writes. It's interesting how it took a movie based on and starring a toy line to incorporate elements from most filmed versions of Batman without ending in disaster. Why, I do not know, because at the end of the day, whether using real actors or a CG version of Lego bricks, the story and approach would be the same. The only odd thing was the I hate you more exchange between Batman and Joker. If this film was written as if a child created the adventure, I cannot see the kid having Batman and Joker speak in that manner. Yes, that's probably true, although Tim and I can, totally see a kid going, pew, 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 as Tim mentioned after we recorded last time.
Right, yeah, that when you mentioned that during the podcast, I kind of then later got to thinking, oh, okay, that's why it's pew, 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 instead of actual shooting sounds.
Yes, and that happens in the original Lego movie and the Lego sequel, too, as well.
Mm-hmm.
Robin presented as a naive, sort of clueless boy was another odd part, when I cannot recall a version from the comics, and certainly not Burt Ward's interpretation that plays that way. I think the writers went too far exaggerating Robin's golly gee behavior to hit viewers over the head as a contrast to the super serious Batman. Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, well, I had read somewhere that they were meaning him to be like Burt Ward's Robin, but it's kind of a poorly remembered Burt Ward's Robin.
Yeah, it is. It's someone trying to remember it without going back to watching the show to get a sense of what it really was like.
Mm-hmm. Okay, from Robin Boy Blunderer. A couple years ago, I gave the Lego Batman a shot and quickly realized it wasn't for me. While I get why so many liked this movie, a lot of the humor didn't connect. Batman in his Hugh Hefner robe struck a wrong note for me, while Robin came across too twee. he made Burt Ward's Robin feel like Connery's James Bond in comparison, or like some girl teeny bopper anime fan's dream boyfriend. And the Joker's weird wannabe, emotionally intimate relationship with the Caped Crusader felt off, especially in a movie for children. The finale reinforcing this more emotional Batman, especially toward his arch-nemesis, really missed the mark. While I think its kitchen sink approach to some of the pop culture worked better than Ready Player One, how could it not?
Good. Somebody else who can't stand Ready Player One. I really tried, too.
The inclusion of Sauron and co. felt needlessly gratuitous. To top it off, wait, there's more? Holy downer. Barbara as hyper-competent policewoman/commissioner, ? And superhero just made an already overcrowded movie feel even more bloated. Holy, don't hold back and tell us what you really think. Was it all bad? Nah. I do enjoy this version of Batman, the ego, the voice, the inability to admit he's wrong or ask for help. I think I saw a clip on YouTube where he throws batarangs over and over until he finally hits the target and acts like he did it on the first try. Though that's a different movie, I think, it's still amusing, and the microwave gag was funny. This wildly egotistical, overdramatic, and self-involved take is pretty good and shows how the 66 less serious approach is now seen as valid as Burton's gothic fantasy or Nolan's darker, slightly more real version. While the main subject of this podcast didn't interest me, I respect you fellas stretching the parameters of your show.
Yeah, it seemed like a good bet for us to take it up for the show, precisely because it takes the 66 mythos relatively seriously, but also in some ways is undergirded by it in ways the film is not entirely conscious of, which is kind of interesting, to say the least. So I think you're right that the less serious approach, as you say, is now seen as valid, as valid as Burton's gothic fantasy, etc., etc. I think that's right on the nose. Okay, last letter, note, email, whatever you want to call it, post is from a High C. That's an interesting and sound idea, your rule about watching something twice before commenting. That's kind of my rule with your podcast, honestly. Yeah, I always tell my students never watch something once and expect to get enough out of it that you're really going to be able to analyze it. If it weren't for you constantly Mr. Magooing, your term, your way into unintentional timely tie-ins, I think you planned this to sync up with the fact that the director of this movie is also the director of the just-released streaming blockbuster The Tomorrow War. Oh, that's the Chris Pratt film, I think. But I know by now it's always just a happy accident when something such as that occurs on this show. Yes, the fates are smiling upon us.
Remember, our Batman's Anniversary episode ended up coinciding with all kinds of other anniversaries, including the anniversary of the Batman character and of the start of this podcast.
Right. And I think there might have been a total eclipse of the sun on the same day, possibly. Kidding. Not quite that good at coming up with those kinds of convergences. You made some good points, as always, IC continues, including how a lot of this would go over kids' heads. With that in mind, I'm not sure if Will Arnett's choice for Batman's voice was all that child-friendly. Too much Christian Bale in it for my taste. For me, that's kind of what made it great, is that he's playing the Christian Bale, but playing him as this kind of doofus who thinks he's much tougher and better at his job than he actually is, which Will Arnett is really great at doing in general. And Joker and Robin thus came off kind of anemic vocally by comparison.
I wanted to say, it's not like there were no kids who watched the Nolan Batman films, I'm guessing, whether they were appropriate for kids or not.
True enough. I can't see it being my thing, but that's just me. I personally don't find the Lego shapes pleasing to the eye in animation form. As far as the reference to Robin not being his son, that actually reminded me of the scene in the series finale when Minerva called Robin Batman's son, and Batman said he'd be proud if he was. Just my 2 cents. Gee, I'd forgotten about that entirely.
Yeah, I had kind of forgotten about it too, and thinking about it, it's kind of a nice moment, especially for a season 3 episode.
That's true. Yes, it seems to have a little more presence of mind to reflect on the themes of the show than most season 3 episodes have any time for.
Mm-hmm. So next time we're going to be talking about Batman and Robin. Of course we're talking about Batman and Robin. No. We mean the Schumacher film. We've done the 2 Burton movies, and we did Batman Forever, so let's do Batman and Robin. I don't know that we're going to do any further than that. Nolan Batman seems a little too far from 66 to give us much to talk about. I don't know.
Right. But the idea for jumping to the final Schumacher film occurred to us because, hey, Mr. Freeze, right?
Right.
We're looking at 3 different iterations, 3 different portrayals of Mr. Freeze by 3 different actors. Let's move on to Arnold. Well, that's the terminus point for just about everything else in Western civilization.
Right. Okay, so we'll see you again in 2 weeks at the same Bat RSS feed.
Take care.
Check the show notes for Jose Fajardo's Batman Boogaloo, the YouTube videos of Adam West in Cartoon Lost and Found, and the Color Forms ad, and the message board thread about our Lego Batman episode. Batpulls at deconstructingcomics.com is the address to send us your Bat missives or any interesting Bat audio that we haven't used yet on the show. We're on Twitter at Decon Comics, and recent Batpulls episodes are now available on the Deconstructing Comics YouTube channel. I'll link to our channel from the show notes as well. Check out the sample TV trivia video there too. You can hear outtakes from this and every episode of To the Batpulls and vote for future podcast topics by supporting us at patreon.com/deconcomics. You can also help us out by shopping via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon, by sharing our episodes on your social media, and by subscribing to the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. And spread the word. Let all your friends who are Batman 66 fans know about the show. Next time, we at last complete our look at the Burton-Schumacher Batman films with a review of Batman and Robin. Molded and muscular bat costumes at the ready. We'll see you in 2 weeks. To the Batpulls is a production of deconstructingcomics.com.